Black Friday, the 13th of January 1939, ranked with Black Thursday in 1851 as one of the most devastating fire days since European settlement.
Bushfire brigades attacked the flanks of the fires along the foothills and lower slopes of the mountain ranges. In other parts of the state, experienced firefighters in the big timber country waged a losing battle against overwhelming odds and fought in vain to save homes and townships. Soldiers in camp in Seymour were called upon to help fight the fire in the pine plantation at Bright.
71 people died on Black Friday. Travellers on the highways were trapped and perished. Whole townships were obliterated in a few minutes. More than 1.5 million hectares of state forest was razed.
Sadly, in Tarrawingee in 1943, 10 lives were lost when a fire truck became stuck in a culvert while trying to turn around to avoid a fast approaching bushfire. A memorial has been erected on the spot where the incident occurred. Lara fires, 1969. The fire started around 9:15 a.m. north of Lara, and within an hour it had crossed the highway. With strong northerly winds, the fire consumed all in its path. Sadly, several cars drove into the fire and 17 people died trying to flee. Two people stayed in their car and survived. Many structures were lost, including the local garage. 40 homes, sheds and a school were all lost. Some escaped with only the clothes on their backs. Footscray footballer Gary Dempsey's family farm was destroyed and he suffered serious burns. Silos and railway infrastructure were impacted along with churches. This year marks 50 years since the tragic Southern Aurora train accident when 9 people were killed and a further 117 passengers were injured. Just after 7 a.m, Australia's overnight express passenger train between Sydney and Melbourne, the Southern Aurora, collided with an Albury-bound goods train at Violettown, 174 kilometres north of its Melbourne destination. The Southern Aurora bore the brunt of the collision, with 2 drivers, 1 electrician, 1 conductor and 5 passengers dying. CFA's thoughts are with the families, relatives and friends of those who were impacted by the accident. While we should never forget those souls lost and the impact on families and friends, the efforts of our CFA members, who were one of the earlier responders at this incident, should also be remembered. Local, district, regional and state teams from all facets of the broader community provided steadfast and diligent service during a tragic time in this state's history.
Saturday is looming as one of the worst days for bushfires in
We've looked at the records, and the forecast for Ash Wednesday, even the amended forecast on Ash Wednesday, is not as bad as what's being forecast for Saturday.
As an old bush bloke, you can smell the heat, and you could certainly smell the heat that day. By 10 o'clock there was a strong smell of eucalyptus in the air, which means that the leaves are opening up because it's hot. It was windy and it was hot, and you get to see a heat haze right across the district. So it was, you knew it was going to be a real bad day, and it didn't. Once something started, it took off and it ran, and it really moved very, very quickly.
You woke up early that morning, and I walked out the door at 6 o'clock, and at the moment you walked out the door, I thought, holy hell, something will happen today, because it was so extremely hot at 6 o'clock in the morning, and the wind was a really hot, strong wind already. And everyone was on tenterhooks that there would be a fire of some sort. So everyone was just sort of waiting, hoping that nothing would happen. And the morning went by and it was fine, but of course by afternoon all hell broke loose. Large clumps of black material that had already been burnt was falling all over the place. And it was quite frightening because you were looking around everywhere trying to think, now, where's the fire going to start here?
When the fire was coming towards us, the ember attack was like, it was hailing, but it was hailing embers on that day. The roar of the wind was incredible. It was like you're standing behind a plane and you could barely talk to each other. And then the last thing that happened was a big mob of kangaroos come through and nearly took a few of us out while they were trying to escape. For a period of maybe 5 to 10 minutes, there was 2 of my firefighters that were unaccounted for. We didn't know their location. You can't help but think what worst case scenario is there. And it's just absolutely gut churning. And that was something that will always stick with me as probably the worst part of that day. That helplessness, that's not what we're used to. We're used to on a day-to-day basis attending emergencies and events and bringing those to a conclusion. We couldn't do that, so it was abnormal for us. We're making decisions where we couldn't really use our skills and our equipment and help people, that we sort of had to move on to something that we could achieve. So it was a real conflict, really, of what we're used to doing and making some tough decisions at the time. That feeling, come back to that feeling of helplessness.
Like fire intensity is measured in kilowatts per linear metre. Ash Wednesday, it was 108,000. The predictions on that Friday night for the Saturday was 130,000. So that told me that if a fire started, it couldn't be stopped.
I got a phone call from the regional duty officer saying that they don't have the capacity at the IMT to manage this fire. The group is going to have to manage it, and we'll see what happens. So that left me sitting there as the incident controller for the Bendigo fire, which was a new concept. One stage there, I took a breath and walked outside, and just and it was extreme. And that was the only way you could work out the air conditioning was working, is if you went outside and realised how hot it was. To my right, I could see the Reedsdale plume, a very big plume, and to my left was the Eagle Hawk plume. And then that's when I knew for a fact that we were in real trouble. It was coming straight at us, the Eagle Hawk fire.
Gardens around my house were burning, and the pergola was on fire, but the actual front had gone. I've got a sprinkler system around the back of the house which spread the fire and just pushed it around the house, so we're lucky that we never lost the house. I got a call from the wife saying that she needed a fire tanker quickly, and I didn't have any to spare, and I had to tell her no. Lost shedding and farmland, only one animal, and yeah, a lot of hay and whatever, but nobody was injured, and that was my biggest concern of the whole fire, that we might you know, get somebody into trouble, but we were lucky enough that everybody was safe.
As soon as the promenade captain said that it had jumped the highway, I knew we were in trouble. And it was just a matter of focusing on getting structures in place and getting tankers into safe positions. I tried with my driver and penciler to get towards the head of the fire, and as I went down Carter's Road, the fire met me. And I knew the area, and there were a couple of tankers were heading down the road, and I called them back to where I was, into a paddock with no grass in it, and the fire burnt under us. And I'm quite sure if I had let those tankers go down Carter's Road, we would have had big trouble. Yeah. So that's the one thing I do remember, getting those tankers onto safe ground. When the fire crossed the highway, it burned through my brother Terry's farm and my parents. My father got stopped at a roadblock and wasn't able to get home, and my mother and granddaughter took shelter in the dairy, and the fire burned around them. But Dad always said that was the worst day in his life. Yeah, I forgot about that. Yeah.
We were getting information about how the day was evolving, and I started to get a bit nervous about just what was ahead of us, or ahead of me personally for the day, but ahead of us. It wasn't long after that the deployment came, and I suppose we were in fire mode. Like I was starting to think about, you know, what the day was going to bring. I was thinking about my own house and how we were situated as far as safety. I was thinking about my family. You know, we live on a rural property. I think I went home and checked all of that, and then that was about the time that we had before we were deployed, and I was off. We wouldn't have driven that far south, and then the fire actually jumped the highway in front of us, and that was the other environmental thing. Is just I had never seen fire that big, like 12, 15 metre high flames, and it jumped the highway as though it wasn't even there. Like, we look at the highway as a significant fire break. Well, it was nothing. It was a blip. It was just nothing. As the fire hit trees, they just exploded, and that was all in front of us. And that was just the real moment that I realised where we were going and the situation that we were in.
We could saw the smoke rising coming towards us, and it was pretty tense. Like, we sat round, in all honesty, we weren't talking. We were just sitting there waiting for it all to happen, and it was a really tense moment because we didn't know how fast it was going to hit us. We knew our escape route, we knew how to get out, where we could get out when we needed to, if we needed to. We just simply didn't know what it was going to be like when it hit us.
I think the day was one, as I've used before, it was enormity. I think it was a wake-up call for a lot of people, a lot of members in the community about how we can be impacted and how fires affect us. I think it was a wake-up call to ensure that we better prepare for emergencies, because unfortunately I think these sort of events are going to reoccur again, and unfortunately more often.